It's nice to be here, and what I'm trying to do is I will give you a short overview of the history of religion in human space exploration, and from that history make a step forward and address religious relations to human space exploration as they are now, and then try to extrapolate into the future what could happen with religion and human space exploration, and if there was opposition, how to address that, how to get those people on board, basically. So religion has always played a role in human space exploration. When Apollo 8 flew around the moon on Christmas Day, Christmas Eve 1968, I wasn't even born then, they, yeah, I know, I'm just playing with that. They read from Scripture, Genesis. They read the biblical story of creation, and then they blessed the population of Earth. And in the weeks following that event, the head of the American atheist movement, Madalyn Murray O'Hair, sued the American government for using tax funds for a religious message. The thing about that is that she took NASA to court, and it went to the Supreme Court, but they rejected the case for lack of jurisdiction in lunar orbit. Isn't that brilliant? But that has repercussions for the rest of the space program or religion and so on. So, on Apollo 11, Buzz Aldrin took this chalice, this little chalice, and wine and bread to the moon. And after they had landed and secured the lunar lander, he did not say we are now going to celebrate communion on the moon because, well, he couldn't. But he asked for a moment of reflection and silence on the events of the day. So even there, Christianity played an active part. And I mean, it was a good thing it was on the surface of the moon. If it had been in microgravity, just imagine communion, like pouring it out and then going after the big drop. That would be awesome. I would love to do that one day. From the surface of the planet, the so-called Apollo Prayer League, a group of religious people at NASA, made it their mission to send Bibles to the moon to honor the astronauts who had perished in the Apollo 1 fire. And because one of them, Ed White, had said he wanted to take a Bible to the moon. So they took a couple hundred Bibles to the moon, tried to. In Apollo 12, they put them in the command module and didn't put them in the lunar lander. In Apollo 13, they put them in the lunar lander, but that didn't help them any. And after that, they took a couple hundreds to the surface of the moon and brought them back and handed them out to dignitaries on the surface of Earth. And nowadays, Russian Orthodox priests regularly bless the launches that go into space, which you could argue is more a political statement than an actual religious statement, but I think religion is there, right? And when Ilan Raman flew into space as the first, I don't even know if he was the first Jewish astronaut, I don't think so, but I think he was the first astronaut who made it an issue, that he wanted to observe Jewish ritual in space. Two rabbis formed the Institute for Space Halacha and gave him some hints. So one of the things is, how do you observe the Sabbath in low Earth orbit? The International Space Station orbits the Earth every 90 minutes, and the Sabbath begins with sundown on the Friday and ends when the first stars appear in the night sky on Saturday night. Well, there are always stars in the sky on the International Space Station, but even if you would just take the time span between two sundowns, it would mean that the week would be 7 times 90 minutes long, and you would have to Sabbath for 90 minutes after every 7th period, which would make work impossible. So the solution to that is pretty brilliant, actually. God made the Earth to rotate in a 24-hour rotation, and he made man on Earth. Why change that? So that is, they just adapted to the time zone of the launch complex and held the Sabbath in that regard. Muslim astronaut Sheikh Mustafa Sakur, he's a Malaysian. He flew into to the International Space Station, and he asked his religious leaders how to adapt Islam to space. And that was a question of ritual performance, ritual cleansing, of prayer. And they answered all these questions. There was a fatwa issued by the Malaysian Committee for Islamic Affairs, and they wrote a little book. It's on the internet. If you search for it, you can find it. And it says that the things provided on the International Space Station for cleaning up fulfill the needs for Muslim cleansing ritual. No problem at all. But the question is, in which direction do you pray on the International Space Station, right? If you want to pray to Mecca and you orbit the Earth, and it's there where that cup is, and you go on, right? So that sort of is a problem. And the solution is basically within the tradition of Islam that if you do not know where you are, if you are lost, you have 4 ways to address your prayer in order of importance. At first, you should pray in front of the Kaaba in Mecca. But if you're not there, you should pray in the general direction of Mecca. If you can't do that, well, you should pray to the geographic projection. If you can't do that, you should pray in the general direction, or if you're in space, in the general direction of planet Earth. And if you can't even do that, you just pray with the intention in your heart to pray to the right God, and everything is fine. So that was the solution that was applied here. And the thing with the problem with fasting and the problem with prayer times, they just used the same solution that Judaism provided for the Sabbath. So all major religions adapted pretty well to space exploration, no problem whatsoever. And I would argue that could be categorized in 4 categories. So it's about living one's own religion in space. As I told you, prayer on the ISS, celebrating Christmas. I didn't tell you that Russian cosmonauts regularly celebrate Orthodox Christmas on the ISS. They also brought some icons and crucifixes to the ISS. So there's religious objects on the ISS, which I haven't thought about that. That I might actually make it a religious structure, but well, I need to think about that somehow. Then it's about proclaiming your religion. You read the Bible from space. You bring Bibles to the moon and back to give to politicians. And actually, Johnny Cash wanted a moon Bible, and he wanted to cut it in half to have one for him and one for his partner. But they didn't give him one because he wanted to cut it in half. It's all about upholding religious tradition, on the other hand, so just showing that your religion is able to keep up with modernity, with spaceflight. And it's about transforming ritual to be able to have your religion in new surroundings in the first place. So as long as these 4 things, I would argue, can be done, religions are fine with space exploration, no problem. But what if we leave the influence of Earth? What if we go farther out? And I want to use the example of the Mars 1 mission. I probably don't need to tell you that this is a rather unrealistic concept, but I'm just using it as an argument at this time because something remarkable happened. Mars 1 proposes one-way missions to Mars, and they want to send people there with no return option, right? This is the transfer vehicle. This is the landing capsule. This is a bunch of landing capsules, but there is no ascent stage. So the people will stay there, the people will live there, and the people will die there. It's a one-way mission, 202,568. I got that number from their website. It might be a bit high. People volunteered. And they want to pay for it by sending it out on television, basically Big Brother on Mars. Well, we can talk about the realism of that, but that is not interesting to us. It's emigration to Mars. No return is planned. And the General Assembly of Islamic Affairs and Endowments of the United Arab Emirates issued a fatwa against this. So as the Malaysians issued a fatwa on how to behave as a Muslim in space, these guys issued a fatwa against this mission because they said, and I want to read that, I want to read the English translation. I don't speak Arabic. They said, they compared it to suicide, okay, and said, it is not permissible to travel to Mars and never to return if there is no life on Mars. Such a one-way journey poses a real risk to life and that can never be justified in Islam. So on the one hand, there is sort of a universal need to save lives. There is a possibility, they say, that an individual who travels to planet Mars may not be able to remain alive there and is more vulnerable to death. This death on Mars is in their minds a death for no righteous reason, which will draw, and I quote, punishment similar to that of suicide in the hereafter. So the religious reason on the one hand is a universal religious need for the protection of life against all possible dangers, and keeping it safe is an issue agreed upon by all religions, as they say, and then they quote from Holy Scripture, from the Quran. Do not kill yourselves or one another. Indeed, Allah is to you ever merciful. And the other reason, and this is interesting too, is that they say in the fatwa that they believe there may be volunteers on that Mars mission who try to escape Allah's mighty judgment, which is, and I quote, "This is an absolutely baseless and unacceptable belief because not even an atom falls outside the purview of Allah, the creator of everything." This is really, really interesting. So on the one hand, God is the creator of the whole universe, and he has power over the whole universe. But humans cannot go to Mars because there's an issue of them dying there. I'm sorry about that. So this is not a place to hide from mighty Allah's judgment, while at the same time it was created by him. And I think from a theological point of view, that is, I find it problematic. Personally, I find it problematic. So he has dominion over the whole universe, and he has made us to live here on earth. Because the death argument, I do not really buy. If the argument is that you have a 100% chance of dying on Mars, I'm sorry, but I have to tell you, with the exception of the prophet Elijah, every single human being in the history of mankind died on Earth. So there is a 100% chance of dying on Earth too. So it's all about location, location, location. And this is not a... one other argument they pose is that the status of the Mars colony will be unknown, right? You could land there and then see, oh my God, all the modules are shot. But there would be electronic provisions for that. You could probably teleoperate part of the Mars complex and see if it's life-supporting. So they are not alone in that. Evangelical Christians have said the same thing. I mean, there's the argument that we have been made, that all we know about creation is in the Bible. And if it's not in the Bible, it just isn't there. Ken Ham, this Australian creationist who built the Creation Museum in Kentucky, is very famous for saying that. So I know that he's kind of a fringe guy, and he just built Noah's Ark. We will get to that in a moment. Sorry?
Big boat.
Big boat. It's a big boat, yeah. It's a pretty big boat. But it is there. And a friend of mine, Josh Ambrosius, did research on Pew data on support for space exploration by certain religious groups, and his findings were quite surprising, that he actually found that Protestants, and it excludes us, Protestants are mostly not as supportive of human space exploration as other religious groups. Catholics and Jewish people are the most supportive, and then the Protestants. But the thing with that is that, so the mainline churches are fine with it, but the other groups are not. And there's reasons for that, and I will come to that in a moment. So if dying on Mars is a problem, or going to Mars, what about birth and procreation, right? We don't even want to think about that. But I think we should. So why go? And that's easy, safeguarding humanity. We want to go to make sure, we don't want to put, Elon Musk said, don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? We want to go just to make sure that if this this really big asteroid hits the Earth, the species would survive. And if we want to go, I mean, the religious parallel is obvious, and I just, in the other panel, made a joke about that lion eating a unicorn down there. I'm not going to make that joke again. But if we think about it that way, that goes deep into our culture and comes from deep within our culture. The religious parallel is there, right? If you think about this, you think about space arcs. And that has repercussions, either literal repercussions, that's Ken Ham's arc, and as it says in the Bible, and cover it in Tyvek sheeting and Pergo planks, it's a little known verse of scripture. But he's literally built Noah's Ark and put air conditioning in it, as Noah did then. But he's going to try that this is possible, it's literally true, and this is where opposition comes from. And these people also think that we have been made to stay on this planet. One other thing is that, do you know that guy? That's Republican, is it a senator or a congressman? Congressman Louis Gohmert. He gave a speech about space exploration, and it's also about saving humanity. And basically, to sum his speech up, is if you want to save humanity with a spaceship, don't send gay astronauts because they don't procreate. So what I'm saying is religion can be used in that way too, to take the space arc analog and use it as an argument against cultural change or against societal change that will just give this a religious perspective that it doesn't need to have. So my approach to these problems is the following. I think the first and foremost problem is talking to the people who think that we are leaving creation. We are leaving the place where we were made to stay. And this is true for the fatwa I just told you. This is true for this evangelical argument of lack of biblical reference. But on the other hand, the Creator is omnipresent. And I think we should just turn it around and use that against them and say, when you look at the Bible and at the story of creation, the way they use the word world, the way they use the word earth, is comparable to the way the word is used in the New Testament, but it's a completely different cultural context. There's been a couple of thousand years between that. When the New Testament was written, Judaism had contact with the Romans, with the Greeks, and so on and so forth. So it's the same word, but it's not the same meaning. And if you just take that one step further and say, hey, how are we supposed to think about world now? You can pretty much include the universe as obvious as these people use the omnipresence of the Creator in the whole universe anyway. So I think that is something that could be used to approach religious groups that oppose space exploration. The other thing is, and this is actually not a joke, I didn't even know of that concept. Being a German theologian, we don't have many issues with that. Who of you does not know what the rapture is?
I'm not a religious person.
So the rapture is, and James, you have to help me out here. Is it Thessalonians or Ephesians? It's a verse from the New Testament where they.
John.
Sorry?
Revelation of John.
No, I don't think so. So the thing is.
Second verse, chapter 5.
Oh yeah, I've got it yet. Sorry. So the thing is, it's actually about the question. Jesus said, all I told you will come to pass while this generation is still alive. And then in Thessaloniki, people start dying, Christians start dying, people are being martyred. And the community says to Paul, hey, people are dying, and the Lord said he would come back before they die, so what's going to happen? And Paul says, listen, no problem. He will take those who have died, those who have been martyred into heaven with him, and then he will take us with him. But the rapture interpretation is that he will come one day and take all the believers on earth into heaven. And the problem these people have is, what if you're on Mars on that day, right? Will he only come to earth? And I think that is, so my idea is the context of the verse is not included. It's a distinct theological position. There's a typo there. We can't solve that through theological debate. That's been going around for, 120 years or something, and I would just leave it at that. Yeah. This is something we can't. Sorry?
Assault the rapture itself.
Yeah. So I would just leave that. The other problem is, if we send people into the void, into space, and this does not necessarily have to be unborn life, but if we send people and they procreate in space, is there a good enough argument to actually do that to them? There is the argument that we may not have been created to stay here on Earth, but at least this is a place where we know how to live, where we know how life can be good and how we can live well. Can we challenge this and send people out into space where we don't know what the conditions are going to be? And when we're talking survival of humanity, this issue is solved. But the thing is, we are talking about predetermining individual human life. But that is the same question as if me and my wife would move to, 5 minutes? Would move to, what's a bad city? Well, Bottrop where I live in Germany. So Bottrop is 20 kilometers from us. If we moved to Bottrop, can I subject my child to live in Bottrop, right? Which is basically the same argument. And you can make the argument that living in a bad city, in a good family, may be nicer than living in a really, really good city in an abusive family. So I don't think that is a good argument. But we need a theological evaluation of what means human life. And I think that is something that I was asked in the other session too. It's not only about human life, it's also about bacterial and microbial life. How do they relate to each other, and who has the higher value to life, or the higher, something like that. And the last problem is the biosphere, and that comes from what I was talking about before. What environment do we need? Are we talking terraforming planets, changing the environment in a way that allows us to live there? And what is the ethical value of barren wastelands, of magnificent desolation? This is the anthropocentrism versus biocentrism debate that I think is part of this society for a long time now, because I got this question asked 3 times already while I'm here, and I'm only here for a couple of hours. And one of the theological problems behind that is the so-called stewardship of creation. This is not about having dominion over the universe, but stewardship. And stewardship means you have to care for it, you have to look after it, and not just take it and do with it what you please. And the other thing is transhumanism. We could also modify human life to live on other worlds, and there's religious opposition to that, and they say, hey, you're doing the work of God, you are doing the work of the Creator. And my answer would be, as long as you do not create things out of nothing, I don't think you're actually doing the work of God. So my answer will be, if we're modifying creation, and God has given us the tools to modify creation, why not do it? But again, stewardship of creation is the way to go about it, and not just force us onto anything. So I think I'll stop here. And just let me say that I think the traditional biblical understanding of earth, and that was literally the ground these people stood on, needs to be changed from Earth, the planet, to universe. And I also already gave you some ideas of how we could do that, and that would solve most of the problems I have tried to encompass. And then just think about what a creation myth would have been like if it had been written on a planet with 2 suns. Then it would say, then God made 3 suns. God made 3 great lights, 3 to rule the day, and he made none to rule the night. And he made the stars also, but I'm not sure, will you ever be able to see stars on a planet with 3 suns? So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Yeah.